Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another series of Get the Money Moving with me, Emma Jones, the Small Business Commissioner. I'm very delighted to be joined today by Matt Dowling, who is an absolute freelance czar. He is founder of the Freelancer Club. He has spent years championing the rights of freelancers, and I'm going to have a chat with him today about what he's up to, what he thinks about the recent government response to the late payment consultation, and what the future might look like for freelancers. So, Matt, a very warm welcome to you.
Thanks, Emma. It's great to be here.
Lovely to have you. So, Matt, you are the founder of the Freelancer Club. Just tell us what that is and why did you start the business?
Sure. Well, maybe I'll start with why. So many moons ago, I fell into freelancing, what's known as an accidental freelancer. In effect, I graduated from university and then I found myself getting hired as a photographer for various different projects. And next thing you know, after a number of months, you realize, oh, this is what I do now. And this has become my main source of income. And so technically, I was pretty good. But from a business perspective, I was very much making it up as I went along. So mostly getting away with it and learning on the job. And this approach worked for a while until I got strung along by a company and I was hit with an £11,000 unpaid invoice. And that particular story made the press. Several freelancers reached out who had read the article to say something similar had happened to them, albeit with different companies. And that very much sowed the seed for Freelancer Club later down the road. It became incredibly evident from speaking with other freelancers that the community felt very unsupported, undervalued, invisible. And so this was the gap that we wanted to fill. And what started life as a bootcamp startup, a bootstrap startup, I beg your pardon, providing resources and jobs, which was the main function of the platform. It's evolved over the years into a company that's building the infrastructure for a more accessible freelance economy. So our platform has about 75,000 members today, and that makes up our community and the central hub for freelancers at any stage of their journey. And we have an educational division that we launched about 8 years ago, where we provide more than 35 colleges and universities with freelance support. And that takes shape in the form of program delivery, coaching, access to the platform. And then we have an advocacy division of the company. And that's been a really big part of our mission from day one, raising awareness on a variety of different issues and topics and having positive impact on the sector from everything from culture to policy. So that's where we're at today.
Brilliant. Love it, Matt. Love it. So let's talk about the advocacy piece, because as you say, kind of you had the incident of having an £11,000 unpaid invoice. I think when I first came across you, you were talking about the topic of payment, either late payment or lack of it. So what have you seen over the years in terms of trends on payment? And just tell us some of the activations and campaigns you've run in response to that.
Yeah, well, that particular campaign that you've referenced was called No Free Work. And we launched our business with that mission, very much off the story, my own personal journey. And the intention was to try and eradicate exploitative unpaid work in the sector. And we know unpaid work is a very muddy area. It has lots of different connotations and something we don't necessarily need to go into today. But suffice to say, anything exploitative whereby a company was asking a freelancer to do work, often for exposure or the promise of paid work in the future, or experience. We had recognized that this was rife and it was really having a negative impact on the community. So we ran a survey. We asked over 1,000 freelancers who had accepted unpaid work at some point in their journey, whether that positively or negatively benefited their career. Because the thing that a lot of young freelancers are told is that it's a rite of passage, that you have to work for free. So we really wanted to question that. And the results were absolutely conclusive that over 75% of those that we surveyed said it had either no impact, i.e. it did not benefit them, which by de facto is a negative, or that it heavily had a heavily negative impact on their career. And some of the stories that we were told were really devastating. Cash flow on one side at the lighter end of the spectrum, right up to folks going into deep depression, losing their job. It was really devastating. So I think there's definitely a space to have a wider conversation around the impact of unpaid work and its legitimacy at the moment. But anyway, those results led us down a rabbit hole to start exploring the wider discussion of payments in general, including late payments, which I know is something close to your heart. And late payments have historically been a huge burden on freelancers. So we wanted to try and get a better understanding of that. And in fact, a number of years ago, we collaborated with a number of industry folk and presented a proposal along with an MP with the intention of establishing new legislation and rights for freelancers along the lines of the Freelancing Isn't Free bill that launched in New York originally and is now all over the States. And it includes things like double damages and mandatory contracts and more tangible rights and legal protections for freelancers. So regarding the freelance trends, I think specifically around late payment from a freelancer's perspective, we're seeing a real fear of reputational repercussion from our community. So they generally don't like to call out bad actors who are late for fear of losing that client. We see that quite a lot.
Yep.
We know that freelancers are including interest fees on their contracts, but I have never once heard of anybody actually enforcing that. Mainly because folks, again, are quite scared that it's going to upset the relationship and result in less work in the future. And then there's a whole other cohort that quite simply just don't know what their rights are. And along with the power dynamic that typically exists between freelancers and larger clients, particularly in the corporate space, it's just off kilter. And this all results in cash flow issues that can put freelancers out of business at the extreme end of things. From the hiring side, we discovered that many SMEs and medium-sized companies were hiring freelancers without any real structure or internal hiring systems. A lot of the time they were delegating that process to a junior or somebody that just wasn't qualified. So the whole idea of onboarding freelancers or speaking to them about company culture or even providing them with information around payment just doesn't exist for the vast majority of startup and SMEs. We have a running joke that it's easy to spot the freelancer in a company because they're the one sitting in the corner with their back to everybody. And that's a real indictment of where we're at. So another campaign we ran was called Ethical Hiring. And in essence, it was there to try and provide training, process, understanding when it came to internal hiring structures, specifically for freelancers. So we'd work with companies to try and give them a better understanding of how they could maximize every freelance hire and integrate freelancers in a much more ethical manner than we were seeing in the industry at the moment.
Brilliant. I want to go back to what you said on payment because I think it's really interesting that you said a couple of things. One is that freelancers don't necessarily know their rights. And second is this kind of not wanting to, which is completely understandable, not wanting to publicly kind of say this client isn't paying me. And actually, I'm writing a post for this coming Friday on how I'm hoping that new payment legislation shifts the onus of reporting the client from the small business or the freelancer to where the kind of the large corporate is just much more aware of what they should be doing, which so kind of more to follow on that on Friday. But my question to you on this is, bearing in mind what you've just said of small businesses knowing their rights and kind of not wanting to kind of do this public disclosure of bad practice, what was Freelancers Club's response to the recent government's response to the late payment consultation? So, sorry for anyone who's listening, on the 24th of March, the government came out and offered its response to the late payment consultation and beautifully signalled its intent to kind of get much more feisty on late payers. So how did you respond to this, Matt?
Broadly speaking, super positive. We really welcomed the hard cap on payment terms. and would definitely be in favor of it going down to 45 or 30 days. I think they mentioned 60 days at the moment, right?
Yeah.
So a good start, but
Yeah.
certainly from a cash flow perspective, if we think about how many small projects freelancers have, or even a sort of 2, 3 month project, how detrimental that could be if it remains at 60 days. The mandatory interest, I think, has the potential to be fairly transformative. However, I would say that this will require behavioral and cultural work. If we can normalize the act of charging fees to your original question around late payments, this would be a game changer. Money talks, and we've been advocating for new powers for the Small Business Commission for years, and I know you'll shake things up. So I think if that can come through, I think combined that could be awesome. We definitely would need to see some shift in the way freelancers are taking action, and that all folds into, first of all, knowing their rights, and secondly, ensuring that by expressing themselves and publicly putting themselves out there, that it won't have repercussions in the future. And that's where I think the behavioral and cultural shift needs to take place. But overall, Emma, I mean, really like that it looks like we're going to have clearer rights, stronger leverage. Many of the ideas that came up, they align with the no free work proposal that I mentioned earlier on. So this is something that we absolutely back, and I think it could have a really positive impact. Truly, we've seen this from speaking with Freelancers Union in the US, who led the charge for the Freelancing Isn't Free bill. And there's a lot of similarity here with the government's response. So we'll wait and see once it comes out. But broadly speaking, super positive.
Really great. Okay, lovely, Matt. And again, just kind of a segue because you've mentioned this freelancing bill a couple of times in the States. You have also been a very vocal advocate for more freelance advocating within government. And that turned into a proposal for a freelancer champion within government, which I know is being taken forward. So, Matt, maybe for those who are watching, tell us what the freelancer champion role is, and I guess just your personal take on what would you want that person, when they're appointed, what would you want them to achieve?
Yeah, so this has been something we've been pushing for a long time. I mean, the sector at large has been, and what was a definitely a moment and one of the strong catalysts to spark this was during the pandemic, when freelancers really felt unheard. We were pushing pretty heavily to try and secure financial support for individuals who had lost their client base overnight. So if you imagine a freelancer who's offering a face-to-face service, has suddenly no capacity to be able to work, and then they'd fall through the cracks because they weren't able to be furloughed, and perhaps they had only been in business for a year, and they didn't qualify for any financial aid. There was a number of other criteria you may remember, and a campaign went around that ended up going viral called the Forgotten Freelancers, and I just think it was a real microcosm of the way in which that particular government spoke about freelancing, and the community just felt invisible. They felt that they did not have representation at the top table, and the freelance champion, we're hoping, will change that. So, as you mentioned, I chair a working group that for the past number of months, our remit has been to discuss whether freelance champion would be something positive for the industry. And then once we had decided that, what the shape of the remit might look like. And so very shortly, we're expecting an announcement. And that, I think, is going to be a moment. In terms of their powers, just having a seat at the table when it comes to legislative discussions or policy discussions that can take the viewpoint of freelancers into consideration, I think is huge. I've always felt that freelancers are fairly misunderstood. It's a very eclectic community, certainly not one size fits all. And I'm even conscious just talking about freelancers in such general terms. Part of our working group, we have a number of different representatives from all manner of freelancing adjacent sectors. And all of us have such very different um, feedback and concerns for our communities. And so to have somebody who can collate that information and properly understand what it is to freelance in the UK, I think is a moment, and that can be really beneficial. And then there's just the symbolic nature of it, the fact that we're going to have somebody who can speak on behalf of the 5 odd million freelancers. I mean, 7, 8 million if you include folks who are running a side hustle. Um, I think it is important. For too long, we just have not recognized the contribution that freelancers make, both economically and to our lives on a day-to-day basis. So we are very excited about this appointment, and I think it's the next step on our bigger mission to try and legitimize freelancing in the UK.
Brilliant. So kind of watch this space for the upcoming announcement on that. So I wish you well on that, Matt. So let's talk about the future as a kind of a final question for me in terms of what you think of the future of Freelancer Club, but in particular, something that you're readying to launch later this month, which is an education framework that I know that you've been working on. So tell us about that, Matt. And I guess how does that blend into your vision of what you want Freelancer Club to be doing and the future of the freelancing economy?
Yeah, so the freelance education framework, this was very much a response to the lack of structure and understanding around freelancing at the FE and HE level. So we've been working with educational institutions for nearly 10 years now, and there are some exceptional colleges and universities providing freelance support to students and grads that are, doing a super job of preparing them for the modern working workforce. And that's something that we highly admire, but felt that too many institutions were lacking. And the speed in which freelancing is becoming more and more prevalent within the workforce, it is acting as a central point along with AI agents to drive a number of different businesses. Simultaneously, we have seen a spike in the number of 16 to 24-year-olds start side hustles and freelance businesses. Many have side hustles while they're studying. The latest statistic was over 65%, which just blew my mind to think that that's the reality. So, when I was at university, a first job would be a part-time gig in a coffee shop or a pub. Now, students are making money digitally through content creation by selling their skills. They're just being far more innovative. And I think it's a top of funnel pipeline for a lot of students to go on and do very exciting entrepreneurial things in the future. And that for me is worth supporting, and that is worth legitimizing. So that's effectively what the framework does. At the end of this month, on the 29th of April, we're going to soft launch, and it'll provide a framework and action plan for any educational institution to be able to embed into existing freelance support, or if they're starting from scratch, it'll give a complete roadmap as to how they can embed that into their institutions. They'll be able to glean insights around pedagogy, language, and an approach that will produce meaningful graduate outcomes and results. So this is going to be the national standard that will allow institutions to apply for accreditation further down the road, and not only provide a guide, but to signal to other stakeholders that freelancing is a legitimate career pathway, and it's becoming more and more essential in the way we work. And I think if we think about the trifecta of policy or government, education, and industry, what we're trying to do here is to connect the dots between those three entities. And the freelance champion plays a role in that. The freelance education framework plays a role. And the way in which freelancing is starting to become front and center for a lot of companies is also going to move the dial. So we are really, really excited about this. We're going to be launching a declaration of intent page at the end of the month, whereby individuals and institutions can show their support and also download the official freelance education framework PDF to be able to utilize it straight out of the gate. And then at the end of June, we'll be hosting a live event with our host partner, the University of Birmingham. And that'll be another really big milestone to bring together a community of individuals who are freelance champions in their own right, within their institutions and within their schools, colleges, and universities, to help us align and show that we have this very powerful movement that is hopefully going to make a big difference in the lives of many, many people.
Brilliant. I love it. The future is freelancing, and you are playing such a huge role in it. So my very final question for you, which is a very practical one, is, well, especially back when you kind of, it segues to the start of the story, when you had that £11,000 unpaid invoice. What are your top tips on getting paid with your big clients for Freelancer Club?
I mean, having told you that story, I feel inadequately positioned to answer that question. But having had 20 plus years to mull over it and try and come up with ways in which we can support the community, I'll give you a couple of tips that we offer freelancers. And perhaps I can speak to the other side very briefly. But certainly there's three things that we would want freelancers to consider. First and foremost, to always use a contract, and if possible, to try and secure a deposit where possible. Just getting the money moving, and I know that aligns well with this particular podcast. That in itself lubricates the process of completing payment, and we've seen really good results when individuals, freelancers in this case, are able to take 30, 40, 50% upfront. The second is to invoice on the day of completion. So, if it is a small project, once that delivery is in the hands of the client, to send the invoice there and then. And a lot of freelancers who have taken that action, particularly with SME clients, so smaller clients. So we're not talking about the bigger guys who have a more convoluted payroll system. They've found that mechanism of sending it on the day has a really positive impact on getting paid, not only on time, but ahead of time. And then the final thing would be on the chase up. So earlier on, we were speaking about reputational damage and that fear of rocking the boat. Something that is a neat way to try and circumnavigate that is using either an app or a virtual assistant or some sort of third-party platform to be able to chase late payments or even to send reminders. And just that act of separating you as a person with the chase can both retain the relationship with the client, but also shuffle them along to try and get paid on time. And then you also have that option to step in as yourself, which adds more gravitas, because up until now they've just received reminders from an app or from somebody else. And that often can help escalate payment. So what we're trying to suggest is to make it as frictionless as possible for the client to pay. So a lot of freelancers will use, a one-click payment system, for example. And these kind of practical steps we've found have a really big impact on freelancers. And really, I hope now over the coming months and years, as we start to see policy potentially turn into legislation, well, that I think would reinforce a lot of this. And I think it hopefully will be a brighter future for freelancers and everybody else when it comes to late payment.
Beautiful. Matt, thank you so much for joining me on this Get the Money Moving webinar. As I say, what you do for freelancers and what you have been doing over the past couple of decades is incredible to watch. So I wish you all the best with ongoing success, with the education framework, with backing the champion. I feel that freelancers are very safe in your hands. So Matt Dowling, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Emma.